Reframing is perhaps the most complex and challenging communication tool that we're going to study in this unit. At the same time, when used well, reframing is the most powerful and sometimes near magical communication tool that a negotiator can have in his or her toolbox. In order to understand fully what reframing is, we need to take a few steps back and understand something very, very basic about negotiation that fits in very well with our communication loop. And is the simple fact that a lot of the messages that are communicated in a negotiation setting are not constructive. And very simply, we tell the other party many, many things that might easily lead us down a fighting path, and the other party might say all sorts of things to us that might easily lead us down a fighting path. And when I say a fighting path, I don't mean that there's anything inherently wrong in fighting. All I mean to say is that if we are looking at this in a negotiation perspective, then we didn't necessarily come here to fight. We came here in order to achieve a certain outcome, and in order to have that outcome, we have to have a certain conversation. And for that reason, we need a tool that is able to take unconstructive messages and turn them somehow back into constructive messages so that the unconstructive messages don't lead us down a path that will probably lead us towards disagreement, but rather we will use a more constructive message that might lead us down a path that might lead to agreement that is beneficial to us. So it's not so much about not wanting to fight, it's about we had a purpose when we woke up in the morning and came to the negotiation. And that purpose was to get something that we needed. We, as the managers of this conversation, we want to make sure that the conversational path we're walking down is one that at least has the potential to lead us from point A, at which we don't have what we want, to point B, at which we do. In order to do that, we need to make sure that some sort of constructive conversation happens and that we don't get derailed by a non-constructive message that the other person sends at us and we respond to. And responding to the other's message is a good place to start our exploration of reframing. When the other sends us a message, they have, to some extent, they have done what we call framing around what it is we're here to talk about, or what it is we're talking about right now. In other words, we said, I'm using these words to convey this message, this is where we are right now, and then my natural instinct is to respond within the frame that the other has provided. So that is often very unconstructive. Let's say that the other has just said, Noam, you're such a jerk. Now, if I would respond within that frame, then I would respond perhaps, no, I'm not a jerk, or you're a jerk, because I would be responding within the jerk frame, okay? It is not always constructive to remain within the frame that the other party has provided. Not only that, the other party, even if the party isn't framing their messages with destructive frames, like, no, you're a jerk, they are likely to be setting frames around the situation, the conversation, and the point that are more beneficial to them than to us. For example, if someone says, Noam, the problem is that you're always late. So the other has set a frame around this conversation of, we are here to talk about why Noam is always late. Honestly, I don't want to talk about that at all. I don't want to talk about it for many reasons, but mainly I don't want to talk about it because I can't win that conversation. Let's think about why. In essence, letting the other party put the frame around a conversation is like when you're playing soccer on an uneven field, or to translate that globally, you're playing football on an uneven pitch, and you invite the other player to choose which side they want their goal to be in. Do they want to be uphill and play downhill, or do they want to have their goal at the bottom and play uphill? So if we allow the other party to frame, we will be playing uphill for the rest of the negotiation. And that is not a good recipe for getting what we want. So what we will want to do is we will want to take whatever frame the other has put around our conversation, if it is a negative frame or a frame that doesn't work out for us, and reframe, by which I mean set a new frame around it and get the other party to agree to that frame or to continue to play within that new framing, which is either constructive for both of us or hopefully beneficial to me. What does that look like? Well, there are two major kinds of reframing, although there are many. Some of them are kind of micro, and some of them are more macro. And I'll say this just kind of as a foreword, and in the material we'll see different examples of it. But one is a micro. Let's say when a counterparty says, Noam, you're such a jerk, you always say no. So if I would respond in the other's frame, then I would say again, no, you're a jerk, or probably I'd say, no, I'm not a jerk, and I don't always say no. And I'd be holding a negotiation in which I couldn't win. Because the best I could achieve is that at the end of a long, tiring discussion about whether or not I'm a jerk, the other person might agree, well, okay, maybe you're not a jerk all of the time. Why would I want to hold that conversation? So what has happened here is that the other has sent out or set a toxic frame around our conversation. Noam is a jerk. And I might want to use reframing in order to detoxify the frame that we have around the conversation and hopefully detoxify the conversation. So if someone says, Noam, you're such a jerk and you're always late and you don't care about anything, I might say, well, obviously getting this on time is important to you. And what I've done by that is I've kind of set the toxic part about me and my character and my always and all of that, I've set that aside. I've still tried to identify what the kernel of importance here is, which is that he seems to really want getting things on time, and I've shifted focus to that. I'm more than happy to talk about his desire to get things on time. That's a discussion that I'm willing to have. I am not willing to have a discussion about whether I'm a jerk or not. So through reframing, I've changed the conversation from kind of a detour to a destructive path, and I've changed the conversation towards one that stays on a constructive path. So that's an example of a micro, a detoxification use of reframing. Another way of looking at it, or another way of using reframing, is to change the big picture of what this conversation is about. So if someone says, you're always late and you're ruining my business, so I can say, well, obviously having a good conversation about timeliness is what we need to do here. So what I've done is I've taken his anger and my counterpart's negativity and blaming it on me and framing, well, this is what we're here to talk about. I've changed the definition of our conversation and what we're here to get. So that's more of a big picture, a definitional reframing. And there are others, and we will see these. There are many ways to do this, and there are many ways to describe it. So for now, let's join Professor Mary Lee Brock's classroom at the Werner Institute at Creighton University School of Law, and we'll see how she explains and gives examples of reframing and its different uses.
And we're going to be talking about reframing in the context of your communication strategies and how you, as in negotiations, in conversation, in difficult conversations, can use reframing as a way to change the course of the negotiation in a way that could help you achieve your goals, help you feel better or become better understood, better understand the person we're dealing with. So, with that, we have a frame. So we can't really think about reframing until we think about frame. So the frame is, we're all making sense of our world all the time. We all have our own views, our own history and experience and abilities and values and communication styles. So we we make decisions of all of the information that comes our way, and that frames what we're talking about. So if we look at this picture here, oh, beautiful, it already has a frame, but I could zero in. Maybe I'm going to zero in on this little shore piece here, or this beautiful color here, or some cloud formation here, and that's what I'm looking at. You might be looking up here. So it's all about kind of the frame, and then how do we pay attention to that frame and potentially reframe, if and when appropriate. Again, this is something you kind of pick and choose, strategize. Sometimes it's right there in real time. Sometimes it's after you've gone to reflect upon the conversation. So we have our frame, and we might reframe. So a frame and a reframe. So when you look at this, what do you see? A face. What else? Colors. Yeah, we're all looking at the same thing, but yet, isn't that funny? We kind of, different things come up. It's like, oh, it's like a big glob of colors. Oh, somebody else might see some lips. Wait, there's a spider. Ooh, bows. I mean, that we're all taking in the whole world and making sense. And if we start having conflict around that frame, maybe there's a way to go ahead and reframe. What do you see here? Iowa. Okay. A house. Job. Sun. Iowa. We see a place. Corn. Tradition. So that's all of these things we have a frame when we see an image like this. What do you see here? Deliciousness. Delicious. So food. Business. Industry. So what's different? Aren't they kind of the same?
Front yard, backyard.
Yeah. So rural, food production, farm. So I say that, and I have this in my mind. Somebody else says those very same words and has this in their mind. Might not make for the most productive conversation, right? Our frames are not intending to be so mutually exclusive, but the frame's kind of getting in the way of what we're trying to do. What do you see here? What's your frame of reference here? Sisters? They're in trouble. Time out. Displeasure, angry. Yeah. Yeah. So sisters, they're fighting, they're angry, they're in trouble, they're time out. A theme is emerging from this, kind of negative. So we don't see two adorable girls helping their commercial photographer dad with the photo shoot. No. But we could. That could be a frame. So there's a couple of different styles, flavors of reframing. One might be detoxification reframing. We're going to take a word, an image that's so charged, and see if maybe we could make it a little bit less provocative, a little less toxic, so the other person can hear it. Very carefully, we do not want to strip someone's true meaning. We don't want to devalue their perspective. We don't want to, in the immigration picture, all of a sudden say, like, well, everybody deserves to be able to live, all of a sudden bring into your own, you're not reframing by trying to win somebody over to your values. You're just detoxifying. Another form of reframing is definitional. Okay? I might be talking about popular support, and somebody else might be talking about central government. And how can we have a productive conversation if we haven't even defined what we're talking about? So the frame right now is too broad. It's too wide. It's food production, and then we have that pastoral, traditional view of the farm, and we have the feedlot picture. We're going to be talking about two different things. So how do we define what we're talking about? The definitional reframing. So we're fighting about Thanksgiving at my house, Thanksgiving at Dad's house. Yeah, that's a yes, no, on, off, both, and all of a sudden, unintentionally, my child becomes property that I'm fighting over. So define that. It would be, looking at Thanksgiving is a time where time with extended family and tradition is important. And then so I'm defining, rather than Thanksgiving of it's a Thursday where we need to wear elastic waistbands. It's I'm going to define it as tradition and holiday.
Okay.
Yeah. Metaphoric reframing can be very powerful. We use metaphors in our society, in our language all the time. It ends up being some common ground for us. Instead of making all of these kind of more charged, dangerous comments about someone, you can say, "Oh, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing." That might say, "Oh, I better be a little careful about some trust issues. I might need to vet everything that person says to make sure it's really kind of going to ring true to me." So using a metaphor as a way to reframe. So we can detox, we can define, we can use metaphor.
So Marilee has done a great job of explaining the main uses of reframing and showing some of what it can achieve and how to use it. Now, let's get a bit more into the nuts and bolts of what it looks like and how to do it. And in order to do that, let's join Professor Bernie Mayer's explanation of how to use reframing constructively.
Hi, this is Bernie Mayer. I am a professor of dispute resolution at the Werner Institute at Creighton University. And today I want to talk to you about framing and reframing. One of the key challenges in dealing with conflict is how to establish effective communications. And in particular, how to take what are often very hard, angry, positional, or unuseful ways in which people say things, and hear beneath all these layers to what the real genuine message is that needs to be discussed and needs to be talked about. And that is what we mean when we're talking about the reframing and framing challenge. So what is framing? Framing is a way in which people present their concerns, their issues, their ideas, their problems, their unhappiness. And people can frame things in very useful, helpful ways, or they can frame things in very unhelpful ways. And so part of the art of what we need to deal with in conflict is to try to frame our concerns in a useful, productive, helpful way. But that does not mean framing it in a way that is always nice or easy or unchallenging. It simply means framing an issue in a way that it has the greatest potential to be talked about in a productive manner. What is reframing? Reframing is taking a message that is presented in a very unhelpful or unproductive way or difficult way or toxic manner and restating it to the speaker in a way that we really recognize what is underneath all the different layers. We put their concerns, their ideas out there in constructive, positive terms, focusing on the underlying interest or message, but without some of the toxicity that surrounds it. There are a number of important framing problems that we tend to see. Let's just consider some of these. One significant problem in framing is the way in which people use language itself. And oftentimes people put in very toxic or value-laden words. They make demands instead of requests. They talk about thinking something is immoral and unethical rather than thinking that it is unwise. And so that's one of the problems we're often dealing with is the language itself. Another framing problem is that people tend to put things into positional or either-or language. It's either my way or the highway. It's either we do what's right for the children, or we give in to our own narcissistic need. We either cave in to evil enemies, or we stand up with righteousness. And that kind of positional or either-or language does not help enter us into a productive conversation. Another framing problem that we see is the global definition of problems. Instead of talking about a particular problem and how an organization is being run, we talk about our fundamental problems with the whole philosophy underlying the management of an organization, or that the whole place has to change. And it makes it very hard for people to constructively deal with the concerns they might have. And we also see the opposite problem. Sometimes people talk about very overly specific definitions of issues. I remember one time when I was a mediator in organizational conflict, where initially it seemed like people were talking about how they said good morning to each other. And of course, that was a very overly specific way of framing what was really a problem in respectful communication among people. Another problem we see with framing is that people often focus on what cannot be changed, everything that went wrong in the past, rather than what we can do to make things better in the future. The heart of reframing is the understanding that people have very important things to say that need to be heard, that they want to be heard, but that they wrap these messages in very unproductive ways often. And so the heart of what reframing is about is helping people say what they have to say in a way that helps others to hear it as constructively as possible. Our goal is not, in reframing, is not to take away the very often hard feelings or difficult messages people have to deliver, but to help them say it in a way that maximizes the likelihood it will be heard. Let's look at some examples of how this might work in practice. And in a way, each of you can just think of some of the hard statements that have been made to you that you've been reactive to in your lives, but that you could also think about, well, how can you listen to what is underneath a hard statement to the essential message that needs to be heard? So imagine you hear this statement from somebody who you have worked with in the past on a project at work. Hell will freeze over before I agree to work with you again. It was torture the last time we were on the same team, and I won't subject myself to your arrogance again. Now, our initial reaction to a statement like this might be to want to let the other person have it and give them a piece of our mind and stand up for ourselves, all of which are totally understandable, and we may have to find a way of saying that seems unfair to us, and it's not something that we want to have to subject ourselves to. However, let's just look at the statement itself for a moment. Consider two aspects of this statement. Take a look at this slide with the bullseye here. We can consider this a diagram of over almost every difficult or hard statement that people make in life. That there is what we could call the gem. And that is the real meaning of the statement that needs to be heard, that needs to be acknowledged, and that needs to be listened to. But that gem is wrapped in a lot of static that makes it hard to get to it. And in a way, the art of reframing is about removing that static so that we can really talk about the gem. But here's the key that we have to remember. The gem is not necessarily the nice part of the statement. So, for example, in this statement that I just read, part of the message is, I am angry, I don't like you, I didn't like working with you before, I don't know that I want to do it again, and I certainly don't want to have the kind of experience where I felt subject to your power before. Well, that's a hard message, but we can hear it and we can listen to it. But consider the static that makes it hard to do that. It's some very difficult language and words like arrogance, torture, hell will freeze over. Those are the things that shut us or other people down very quickly, and we can't hear the real message, even the hard message underneath it. The other thing that might make it hard is there is an implied threat here, and that makes it also hard for people to hear what is really being said. So think of reframing as the effort to get at the gem by removing some of the static. So how might we take a statement like that and reframe it? Consider the following effort. The statement might be reframed as, we had bad experiences working together, and neither of us want to repeat it. You did not like how I approached the project, or you as a team member, and you are obviously still really angry about it. I did not like what happened either. If we are going to work together again, we have to make sure that we find a way to ensure this experience is not repeated. Now, is that an effective reframing? Well, it might be, or it might not be. We can't know that in the abstract. We can only know it in terms of how it plays out in real life interaction with someone else. We might have gotten it right, but as the next slide shows, we might have missed something. What might have we missed? Well, we might have missed the intensity of the anger. It might be, no, it's not just that we had a bad experience. It was horrible. It was one of the worst experiences I ever had in my life, and I am really still seriously annoyed about it. So we might have missed the intensity of it. We might have missed the fact that it's not a generalized thing about how we want to work in the workplace life in general, but it's specifically directed towards a particular person, maybe us. So we might have missed the fact that it wasn't that we just had a hard time working together. You're telling me you have a hard time working with me and how I work. And we might have missed the absolute determination expressed in this person not to work again in these circumstances. So while the reframing might have worked, it might not. We might have missed something. If so, we'll be able to tell that. How will we be able to tell it? Somehow or other, in our interaction, the other person will show it to us. They'll keep repeating the statement. Their energy will still be negative. They will still look very agitated. If so, we'll have to keep on working on it. So let's revisit the concept of reframing in terms of the different steps that we go through. And it's not that this always happens exactly in this sequence, but it tends to work something like this. The very first thing that happens in reframing, whether we're talking about reframing in terms of being the person to whom a statement is directed or acting as a third party trying to help two different people talk to each other, the very first step is to listen to the statement, to really hear what someone is saying, to work to understand the interest or the message that is embedded in the statement. And then the next thing we do is we try to ignore or remove the toxic language from the statement that makes it hard to hear the essential message. We then restate the message, including the real issue or interest, in as balanced or as productive a way as possible. And then we check it out with a person to see if we've gotten it right. If we have, we're ready to move on. If not, we may have to do some more work on it. Effective reframing has the following characteristics. Number one, it is interactive. It isn't something that we do on our own and other people say, oh, wow, that was a wonderful reframing. I'm really happy to move on now. It's a joint effort that we work with people about. We work together with people. Number two is iterative. That is to mean it usually takes several efforts at refining the reframing or the framing so that we really capture the message in a way that allows us to progress with the communication. Number three is transparent. We aren't trying to do something sneaky or hidden here. We're very open about the fact that we're trying to find a way of stating what they have to say so it really captures their meaning but allows us to talk about it. Number four is it's strategic. Not every single statement that somebody makes needs to be reframed. And number five, it has to be respectful. And that means we don't remove the essential, even the most unpleasant aspects of the speaker's message. Instead, what we're removing is the elements of the statement that make it hard to hear the message. Let's just take a look at this slide on a formula for joint problem-solving statements, because this is what reframing often leads to in problem solving, where there are two different parties. It can either be a third party or we could be one of the parties. One of the parties says something, that statement needs to be worked out and put on the table in as productive a way as possible. Then another party says something. That needs to be worked on and put on the table in as productive a way as possible. And then these two, in some sort of way, have to be joined so that we create a joint problem-solving statement that might sound like, how can the two of us work together on a project that we both care about, given that we have very different styles of work and different communication styles, but we want to be productive and respectful of what we each have to contribute, and we don't want to repeat the bad experiences we had in the past. That might work. If it does, it really allows people to go forward with a discussion that can be productive.
This is a very, very tricky skill to learn, and it requires a lot of practice and a lot of thought. It doesn't work all the time, and you just need to work at it, and at some point you'll discover that you're doing it well. But no matter how well you do it, you have to keep practicing it. So let's just quickly take a look at an example in which Bernie and I are engaged in a negotiation, and we'll see how reframing is used to change this conversation.
And I hear that there's a problem with the dogs, and maybe the kids too sometimes. And there may be some things I can do about it, and I hope you'll understand that there's some limits on what I can do with kids, and that other kids are kids, dogs are dogs. And we moved in here partly because it was a place that we could bring pets, and that's always important to us. But I hear that you really want me to work on it, and maybe there's some ways in which we can have rules about play and where they are at different times.
So you're saying maybe by working together on this as a set of problems, we can both, kind of learn what the limitations of living close to each other are, and also find solutions to some of these problems. What we've seen so far is that reframing is a very powerful tool for setting the stage for having a constructive conversation that can lead to getting what we want. It's not the tool for getting what we want in its own self. Reframing is about setting the stage for the upcoming conversation. It's about clearing stuff away, clearing noise, clearing toxicity, clearing things that are going to lead the conversation astray, clearing that all away, setting the stage up so that it is clear to have that constructive conversation on, and also setting up the stage so that it is most beneficial to us to obtain whatever it is that we came here to obtain. We will use other communication tools to actually lay out whatever it is we've come here to say, and say it to the other in the best way to get the points across. But reframing is a vital stage for preparing the stage for that act.